On a fog-shrouded Virginia night, the plantation lay silent, except for the faint rustle of leaves and the distant bark of the master's dogs. In the shadows moved Samuel, an enslaved man whose courage and wit had long gone unnoticed. Tonight, he would face a choice that could cost him everything or change his life forever. Stay with us as we uncover his daring plan to outwit the overseer's guards under the dead of night. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from our forgotten past. The morning sun rose over the rolling fields of Virginia, but for the enslaved people who labored there, dawn brought no relief, only the promise of another grueling day. Samuel woke before the first light, the cold dirt floor of the small cabin pressing against his back. His body ached from the previous day's labor, yet his mind was alert. Every day was a careful balance of survival and observation, and Samuel had learned that the smallest detail could mean the difference between life and death. The plantation was vast. From the main house, where the master and his family lived in lavish comfort, to the outlying fields, every inch of land was controlled, every footstep monitored. The overseer, a harsh man with little patience for mistakes, patrolled the rows of crops like a hawk. Behind him, the pack of dogs prowled, sharp eyes and teeth, ready to punish anyone who strayed from their tasks. Samuel had learned to move silently, to make himself nearly invisible. He knew the patterns of the overseer, the rhythm of the guards, and the particular ferocity of the dogs. Life under such constant surveillance demanded cunning as much as strength. Samuel's days began before sunrise, weeding rows of tobacco or hauling heavy sacks of corn. The sun beat down relentlessly, the fields stretching endlessly, and yet there was no break, no relief. Any momentary lapse, any hesitation, could draw the overseer's ire. Samuel had seen it happen, friends punished, whipped, or even sold away because someone faltered or dared to look back at the master's house. But Samuel had something else, something the overseers could not control, a mind that observed, calculated, and remembered. He noticed every guard's tendency, every dog's favorite path, the slight hesitation of an overseer when confronted with a problem. He knew which fields were easiest to slip away from, which cabins held allies, and which routes were safest after dark. This intelligence was his most powerful weapon, though it remained hidden beneath a mask of quiet obedience. Evenings brought little comfort. As the sun sank behind the trees, casting long shadows over the plantation, the laborers returned to their cabins. Fires were lit, meals were quietly prepared, and hushed voices whispered stories of what might have been, rumors of escape, fleeting glimpses of freedom in far-off towns, and tales of others who had dared to defy their masters. Samuel listened, not just to the stories, but to the lessons hidden within them. Every whisper was a thread in a web of knowledge he was slowly weaving, a map of possibilities that could one day be put into action. Despite the oppressive conditions, the community among the enslaved people was resilient. Families clung to each other in the small cabins, children huddled close to their mothers, and elders passed down tales of survival and subtle resistance. Samuel's own family was a source of quiet strength. His younger sister Clara often fetched water from the distant well, her small hands trembling under the weight of the pail, yet she always returned with a determined spirit. His mother, weary yet unwavering, reminded him that even in chains, dignity and cleverness could survive. These bonds were a lifeline, and Samuel knew that whatever plan he devised, it would not just be for himself, but for all of them. The overseer's cruelty was constant and unpredictable. Samuel had witnessed men and women beaten for the smallest infractions, leaving tools slightly askew, failing to meet quotas, or speaking without permission. The dogs were not just tools of intimidation. They were weapons trained to strike without hesitation. The crack of a whip, the snapping teeth, the bark that cut through the night, All of these were reminders that freedom was distant, and every move must be measured, precise. Yet amidst the fear, Samuel also noticed the small cracks in the overseer's armor. There were moments when he hesitated, when his anger gave way to distraction. The dogs, while loyal and fierce, were creatures of habit, predictable if studied carefully. Samuel observed the way they followed the same paths, the way they barked at certain triggers, but not others. He cataloged everything in his mind, turning what might have seemed like mere observation into a strategy. A map for survival, the plantation was a place of contrasts. The master's family lived in comfort, enjoying meals by candlelight, wearing fine clothes, their laughter echoing across the grounds. Meanwhile, Samuel and others labored endlessly, their hands blistered, backs sore, and spirits tested daily. Yet it was in these contrasts that Samuel found his strength not in brute force, but in knowledge, patience, and courage. He also understood the stakes. One mistake, one misstep, could mean the end not just for him, but for anyone who might follow his lead. Escape attempts often ended in capture, punishment, or worse. The memory of men who had tried and failed haunted him, a stark reminder that cleverness alone was not enough. It had to be paired with timing, patience, and a deep understanding of the landscape, both physical and social. Samuel's eyes often lingered on the horizon as the day ended, imagining what lay beyond the plantation gates. Stories of the free North, of towns where men and women could walk without fear of a whip or a dog, filled his mind. These thoughts were dangerous if spoken aloud, but in the quiet of night they became his fuel. They reminded him that the chains he bore were not eternal, and that even under the harshest oppression, hope could flicker, small but persistent dot by the time the sun dipped fully below the horizon. Samuel's plan had already begun to take shape in his mind. Every observation from the past weeks, the guard rotations, the dogs' patterns, the overseer's moods, was cataloged and analyzed. He saw a window, a small opportunity that might allow him to outsmart the overseer and his men. It would require courage beyond measure, a night of calculated risk, and an unwavering belief in his own wits. But Samuel knew that courage alone would not suffice. Intelligence, timing, and patience were equally vital. Even as he prepared mentally, the sounds of the night reminded him of the danger. The bark of a dog in the distance, the creak of a floorboard in the main house, and the occasional shout of an overseer kept him alert. Samuel moved carefully, ensuring he was never seen. Each night of observation brought him closer to the moment he would act, a night that could change the course of his life and the lives of those around him. In these moments, Samuel's determination grew. He had seen too much suffering, too much injustice, to remain passive. He had witnessed fear and cruelty, but he had also witnessed resilience and hope among his people. That hope, that resilience, became his guide. And as the moon rose high over the Virginia fields, casting silver light over the silent cabins and endless rows of crops, Samuel knew that the night of reckoning was approaching, that it would be a night that required every ounce of his courage, every fragment of his intelligence. One misstep could lead to disaster, yet one precise, calculated move could bring temporary freedom, or at least a taste of justice, in a world where justice was a rare and precious commodity. Samuel's plan was risky, but for him it was the only path forward. And so, as the plantation settled into an uneasy quiet, Samuel's mind raced. The day's labor had ended, but a greater work was about to begin. With the memory of his family's suffering etched in his heart, the knowledge of the overseer's patterns in his mind, and the silent promise of hope guiding his steps, Samuel prepared to embark on a daring act of cleverness that would change everything. As the nights grew darker, and the overseer's cruelty remained relentless, Samuel began to understand that survival alone was not enough. The routine of labor, the constant watchfulness, and the ever-present threat of punishment weighed heavily on him and everyone around him. Yet, amidst the fear, a spark of determination began to grow quiet. Persistent thought that perhaps he could change the rules of this oppressive game. Samuel's intelligence had always been his quiet strength. While others labored and endured, he observed. He studied the guards' movements like a careful student of human behavior, noting the brief lapses when the overseer's anger distracted them, the predictable turns of the dogs along the fences, and the ways in which fear made even the strongest men hesitate. These observations were not idle. They were pieces of a puzzle, fragments of a plan that was slowly taking shape in his mind. He began speaking in whispers to those he trusted most. His friend Elijah, who worked alongside him in the fields, was one of the first to hear the idea. They would meet under the cover of night in a quiet corner of the tobacco barn, where the overseer's eyes rarely reached. Samuel explained what he had noticed. The guards relied heavily on the dogs for control, and the dogs, while loyal, were creatures of habit. They could be guided, if only subtly, away from their usual paths. Elijah listened, a mixture of awe and fear in his eyes. "Samuel," he whispered one night, "if this goes wrong—" Samuel placed a steady hand on his friend's shoulder. "I know," he said quietly, "but if we wait for someone else to act, we may wait forever. We cannot change our lives by waiting." The planning was meticulous. Samuel marked in his mind every detail: the rotation of the guards, the times when the overseer would retire to his study, the paths the dogs favored, even the sound of the wind as it swept through the rows of tobacco. Every observation became part of a strategy, a map that could guide them through the night without alerting anyone to their intentions. But planning alone was not enough. Samuel needed all-eyes people who could move silently, who trusted him completely, and who shared his desire for at least a fleeting taste of freedom or justice. Slowly, cautiously, he spoke to others in whispers. Men and women who had proven themselves vigilant, careful, and brave in small acts of resistance. They listened, eyes wide with fear and hope, and agreed to follow Samuel's lead. Understanding the risks as clearly as he did, the emotional stakes were immense. Each person involved knew that discovery could mean whipping, imprisonment, or being sold to another plantation far away. Yet the desperation for a moment of control, for a chance to act rather than merely endure, was stronger than the fear. Samuel's plan was not born of anger alone. It was born of the desire to reclaim dignity, to show that intelligence and courage could challenge even the cruelest authority. Night after night, Samuel rehearsed the operation in his mind, imagining each step, each twist, each possible error. He visualized the guards' positions, the paths the dogs would take, and the exact timing required to move without detection. Every detail mattered. The slightest miscalculation could unravel the entire plan. But he was careful, patient, and precise, and with each passing night, his confidence grew. There were small tests along the way. Samuel would leave small distractions for the dog's sticks or scraps of food, placed subtly along certain paths, and watch from hidden vantage points as the animals reacted exactly as he anticipated. These experiments were nerve-wracking, requiring absolute silence. But they gave him the proof he needed. The dog's loyalty could be redirected, the guard's attention could be misled, and the oppressive system, though terrifying, was not invincible. Even with careful preparation, doubt crept in. Samuel would lie awake in the cold, whispering to himself, imagining the overseer's anger, imagining the dogs lunging, imagining failure. But he pushed the fear aside, grounding himself in the knowledge that courage was not the absence of fear, it was action despite it. Every calculation, every observation, every whispered conversation strengthened his resolve. By the time the moon rose high over the fields, casting a silver glow on the tobacco rows and cabins, Samuel felt ready. He had chosen the night carefully, when the overseer would be most distracted and the guards least vigilant. He had selected his allies, rehearsed the steps, and understood the risks. All that remained was action, turning his careful planning into a daring reality. In the quiet moments before midnight, Samuel took a deep breath and felt the weight of his decision. This was not merely a night of cunning. It was a night of hope, a night where intellect and bravery could intersect to carve a moment of freedom from the suffocating grip of oppression. He glanced at his companions, who nodded silently, eyes shining with fear and determination. The plan had been set in motion, and the night held its breath in anticipation of what was to come. The night had settled into a heavy, almost suffocating quiet. The moon hung high over the Virginia fields, casting silver light on the rows of tobacco and the humble cabins where the enslaved labored and rested. Every shadow seemed alive, every rustle of leaves a potential threat. Samuel moved carefully, his feet brushing against the cold earth, heart pounding but mind razor-sharp. This was the night he had been preparing for, the culmination of weeks of observation, careful planning, and quiet courage. He glanced at his companions, their faces pale in the moonlight, eyes wide with a mix of fear and determination. Elijah, standing closest, gave a subtle nod. Samuel returned it, and without a word, they began to move. Every step was calculated, every sound considered. They stuck to the edges of the fields, avoiding the main paths where the overseer's guards were likely to patrol. The first hurdle was the dogs. The overseer's pack, trained for both obedience and aggression, patrolled the edges of the fields with unnerving precision. Samuel had studied them meticulously, noting their habits, their favorite paths, the way they responded to sounds and scents. He reached into a small pouch hidden beneath his shirt and retrieved a handful of dried meat, his subtle tool for redirecting the animal's attention. Slowly, silently, Samuel placed pieces of the meat along a carefully planned trail, leading the dogs away from the central field where the guards were stationed. He paused, holding his breath, watching as the dogs sniffed, and then followed the trail exactly as he had anticipated. The plan was working. One by one, the dogs left their posts, wandering down the paths Samuel had marked. The tension in the air was palpable, every rustle of leaves a potential warning. But his careful planning held. With the dogs diverted, Samuel and his allies crept closer to the overseer's quarters. The main house loomed in the distance, a symbol of wealth and authority, its windows glowing faintly from candlelight. From this distance, the overseer's routine was clear. He would retire to his study shortly, leaving the immediate paths outside lightly monitored. Samuel had timed everything to the minute. He crouched behind a row of barrels, whispering instructions to his companions. "Stay low. Move when I move. Remember silence above all." The group nodded, their breaths shallow, hearts racing. Every moment was a delicate balance between bravery and caution. One misstep could unravel everything. One accidental sound could alert the overseer or the returning dogs. As they approached the main path, Samuel signaled for Elijah to create a minor distraction. Elijah tossed a small rock into the underbrush, producing a faint crack. One guard shifted slightly, his dog barking at the sound, giving Samuel and the others the opening they needed. Step by step, they moved closer, guided by the pale moonlight and their careful observations. The path led them to the edge of the overseer's small study, where the man's papers and ledgers sat illuminated by candlelight. The overseer himself was there, oblivious to the silent figures moving just beyond his door. Samuel's pulse quickened. This was the critical moment. All the preparation, all the fear, all the observation had led to this point. He had one goal: create confusion and disruption among the guards, by a brief window of control without unnecessary violence. Samuel had prepared small signals rocks dropped in precise locations. subtle movements to direct the dogs and guards into a pattern that favored them. He gestured to his allies, and they executed the plan with silent precision. A dog barked suddenly, its chain of loyalty momentarily broken. The guards, startled, turned toward the commotion. Samuel used the moment to step into the open slightly, directing another distraction, and another guard's attention shifted. The sequence unfolded exactly as he had envisioned, a delicate dance of chaos that placed the overseer and his men at a disadvantage. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Every sense was heightened: the snap of a twig, the rustle of clothing, the bark of a distant dog. Samuel remained focused, guiding his companions with subtle gestures. One guard ran toward a sound, the dogs following, leaving gaps in their patrol. Another stumbled over a carefully placed obstacle, cursing in surprise. Samuel's plan was working. Even as the tension mounted, he kept an eye on his allies. Their faces were pale but resolute, hands steady despite the fear. He whispered encouragement when necessary, small reminders to stay quiet, to stay calm, to trust in the plan. Every moment required absolute control over both himself and the others, a balance of courage, intelligence, and nerves of steel. Finally, the plan reached its apex. The remaining guards were disoriented, the dogs diverted, and Samuel had guided the group to a position of temporary safety near the edge of the plantation. From here, they could move freely, at least for the moment, and the overseer's authority was undermined, if only briefly. It was not a complete victory, not yet, but it was enough to claim a small measure of control. A taste of empowerment in a world designed to strip them of it. Samuel paused for a moment, taking a deep breath, letting the adrenaline subside. The night was far from over, but the first stage of the operation had succeeded. His mind already raced ahead, considering the next moves, the safest paths back to the cabins, the signals he would use if the overseer attempted to regroup. Every detail he had observed, every calculation he had made, had contributed to this success. He glanced at Elijah and the others, their eyes reflecting the moonlight and the unspoken understanding that they had achieved something remarkable. Samuel allowed himself the smallest smile, a fleeting moment of satisfaction amidst the danger. For a brief night, they had seized control, outsmarted the guards, and turned the overseer's own tools discipline, dogs, and fear against him. The rest of the night would require careful navigation and vigilance. But Samuel knew they had proven something vital. Intelligence, courage, and preparation could challenge even the most oppressive systems. The operation had not been easy, and the risks were far from gone. But they had acted with precision and bravery. And for the enslaved people of the plantation, that was a victory in itself, not by the time dawn approached. Samuel and his allies had returned to the relative safety of their cabins, hearts still pounding with spirits lifted. The night had been a triumph of cunning over fear, of intellect over brute force. Samuel's mind already began cataloging lessons learned, adjustments for future challenges, and the small ways in which they could continue to assert control over their own lives, even in the shadow of oppression. And though the overseer would soon realize the disruption, Samuel's careful planning ensured that no one would be caught or harmed unnecessarily. The brilliance of the operation lay not only in its daring, but in its restraint, an assertion of cleverness and courage rather than violence. For Samuel, this night was proof that even under the harshest chains, one could carve out a moment of freedom, however fleeting, and leave an indelible mark on the memory of those who witnessed it. The first hint of dawn crept over the Virginia fields, painting the rows of tobacco in a soft, golden light. The plantation seemed still, almost unaware of the events that had unfolded under the moon's watchful gaze. Samuel and his companions moved carefully, hearts still racing, but a quiet sense of triumph settled over them. The overseer's dogs, once the sharp teeth of control, had been diverted. The guards, disoriented and confused, were left chasing shadows rather than people. For the first time, the enslaved had seized the upper hand. If only for a few hours, Samuel's mind replayed the operation in vivid detail. Every step had gone according to plan, every distraction had been executed flawlessly, and every ally had followed his lead with courage and precision. The risks had been immense discovery, could have meant brutal punishment, or worse, but now, in the soft light of morning, a sense of relief and quiet pride settled over the group. They had done what few could have imagined, turned fear into opportunity, chaos into control. The overseer, rising to begin his morning inspections, found confusion in his domain. Dogs returned reluctantly, still sniffing the ground, wary of the distractions Samuel had set. Guards were disoriented, unsure where to begin their search. The plantation, so tightly controlled just hours before, now felt fractured, the authority of the overseer temporarily undermined. Though Samuel and his allies would need to remain cautious. This was a small victory, a momentary reclaiming of power in a world designed to deny it. Back in the cabins, the group shared quiet smiles and whispered congratulations. Fear had been their constant companion throughout the night, but now hope began to take root. For Samuel, the operation was not only about surviving, it was about demonstrating that intelligence, courage, and careful planning could challenge even the most oppressive systems. The victory was subtle, almost invisible to outsiders, but deeply felt by those who had risked everything to achieve it. Samuel's thoughts turned to the larger implications. This night had shown him and his companions that even under relentless oppression, they could assert control, even in small ways. They had disrupted the overseer's authority, outsmarted the dogs, and moved through the plantation with precision and stealth. Each small success reinforced a simple truth. Courage and intelligence were tools as powerful as physical strength, and sometimes far more effective in challenging the established order. There was no celebration, no outward display of triumph. That would have been far too dangerous. Instead, the group returned to their work with renewed focus, each movement deliberate, each glance sharp. The overseer and his guards, though confused and frustrated, still held power, and the enslaved people could not afford complacency. Yet within the hearts of Samuel and his allies, a quiet victory burned, a reminder that even in the darkest of circumstances, ingenuity and bravery could shine. The emotional impact was immediate and profound. Samuel's family, aware of his role in the night's events, regarded him with quiet awe. His younger sister Clara could not fully understand the details, but she sensed the change in the air, the subtle shift from fear to cautious optimism. His mother, weary yet resolute, offered a nod of approval, a silent recognition of his cleverness and courage. These small acknowledgments reinforced Samuel's sense of purpose, reminding him that his actions were not only for himself, but for the survival and dignity of those he loved. As the sun climbed higher, Samuel allowed himself a moment to reflect. The night had been a test of nerves, intellect, and courage, and he had passed. Yet he also knew the consequences of failure. The overseer would soon piece together what had occurred, and the risks would not disappear. Every move from this point forward required continued vigilance, careful planning, and a steadfast commitment to subtle resistance. Even so, the victory, though temporary, was a turning point. It demonstrated that the enslaved people were not merely passive victims of circumstance. They could strategize, collaborate, and reclaim moments of control, even under the most oppressive conditions. Samuel had led with intelligence and courage, turning fear into opportunity and danger into a test of skill and determination. By the afternoon, the plantation had returned to its routine, but Samuel and his companions carried with them an unspoken sense of accomplishment. They had succeeded in a daring, dangerous operation that few could have imagined possible. The overseer's authority remained intact in appearance. But beneath the surface, the balance had shifted, if only slightly, for Samuel. The night was proof of a broader truth: courage, intelligence, and careful planning could carve out space for autonomy and dignity, even in a world designed to deny it. The victory was not celebrated with fanfare, but it was deeply felt, etched into memory, and carried forward as a quiet triumph in the hearts of those who had risked everything in the days and weeks that followed. Samuel's actions became a source of quiet inspiration. Others watched him with a new awareness, recognizing that strategy, patience, and courage could challenge the seemingly unyielding power of the overseer. The plantation remained a place of hardship, yet the memory of the midnight operation served as a reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, resistance, however subtle, was possible. And so, as the sun set over the Virginia fields once more, Samuel's heart carried the knowledge that the night had been a victory not only of cunning, but of courage. A small but meaningful reclamation of power, hope, and dignity in a world designed to take all three. As the weeks passed, the events of that fateful night remained etched into Samuel's memory like a carefully carved mark on the heart of the plantation. Though the overseer eventually regained some semblance of control, the quiet victory Samuel had orchestrated lingered in subtle ways. The enslaved men and women who had participated or even witnessed the aftermath carried with them a renewed sense of possibility, a knowledge that courage and intelligence could tilt the balance, if only for a moment. Against an oppressive system, Samuel often walked the fields alone, his eyes tracing the rows of tobacco, the rough-hewn fences, the cabins tucked along the edges of the property. To an outsider, it might have looked like the same routine of labor, the same quiet obedience. But for Samuel, every detail was a reminder of what had been accomplished, a testament to the quiet rebellion that had shaken the overseer's confidence. Freedom, he knew, was not a gift granted by the master, but a state of mind and a careful action, seized when opportunity presented itself. History is often told in the grand gestures, the battles won with armies, or the proclamations that changed nations. But Samuel's story reminds us that heroism also lives in subtle acts of defiance, in moments of ingenuity and courage that go unseen by most, yet ripple through the lives of those who witness them. The midnight operation was not a revolution, but it was a reclamation, a brief, shining assertion of autonomy in a life constrained by chains. The enslaved community watched Samuel with a new sense of respect. It was not just that he had succeeded, but that he had done so with intelligence, patience, and a careful respect for the safety of others. He had shown them that resistance could be strategic, that courage could be measured and precise, and that even under the harshest conditions, one could carve out moments of dignity. These lessons were as valuable as any physical escape or act of defiance. They taught resilience, hope, and the power of careful thought. Samuel's family, too, bore the weight and pride of his actions. His younger sister Clara often lingered near him, curiosity shining in her eyes. She did not yet fully understand all the intricacies of the operation, nor the risks involved, but she sensed the courage it took. His mother, though wary and protective, allowed herself a quiet smile when Samuel returned home each night unscathed. They understood, in their own way, that what Samuel had achieved was more than a tactical victory. It was proof that the human spirit could endure, resist, and triumph, even in the most oppressive circumstances. For the overseer, the events of that night were a lesson in unpredictability. Authority, he learned, was never absolute. Even the most carefully controlled environment could be disrupted by intelligence and courage. Samuel had not shattered the plantation's hierarchy, but he had forced a recalibration, a recognition that those he sought to dominate were not merely tools or property. They were human beings, capable of strategy, planning, and quiet rebellion. And this, ultimately, is what makes Samuel's story timeless. It is not a tale of grand battles or sweeping victories, but of one man using his mind, courage, and observation to reclaim a fragment of power in a world designed to deny him agency. It is a story of resilience, the idea that even in chains, the human spirit finds ways to assert itself, to create meaning, and to protect those we love. As the sun rose over the Virginia fields, casting long, soft shadows across the earth, Samuel looked toward the horizon with quiet determination. He knew that life on the plantation would continue to be harsh, that danger would remain constant, and that his nights of planning and vigilance were far from over. Yet he also knew that the night of the operation had changed something inside him and those around him. It had proven that intellect and courage, carefully applied, could achieve what brute strength and fear could not. For viewers, Samuel's story is a reminder that heroism often lives in moments unseen, that courage is not always loud or dramatic, but sometimes quiet, precise, and deeply intentional. It teaches that even in circumstances designed to suppress hope, ingenuity and bravery can create pockets of freedom, however fleeting. It reminds us that every act of intelligence and courage, no matter how small, contributes to the broader struggle for dignity, respect, and humanity. And so, Samuel of Virginia stands as a testament to the resilience of those who lived under oppression, the quiet brilliance of minds that observed and calculated, and the enduring human capacity to hope and act, even when the odds seem insurmountable. His story echoes across time, inviting us to reflect not only on the cruelty of the past, but on the courage, intelligence, and determination that have always burned within those who refuse to be broken. Samuel's story reminds us that courage and intelligence can shine even in the darkest times. If his daring act under the midnight moon inspired you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this story and let others discover the hidden heroes of American history. Hit the like button if you felt Samuel's bravery, and subscribe to our channel to explore more untold tales of resilience, ingenuity, and hope from America's past. Leave a comment below. Which moment of Samuel's night-long operation moved you the most?